And we're recording. Hello, everybody. It's always nice to see people, anybody on a Friday. I consider it a treat. Don't smirk in the back. I'm watching. Remember what I said last time. I'm terrible. Okay, digestive. It's a very unusual system. Okay, there's so much complexity. For me, it's hard because I got to figure out what to include and what not to include, so you can get the big picture. But I know, and I told the other group, there's so many different enzymes and enzyme names when you get into the actual chemical aspect of digestion. We'll try to stay away from it, other than the major ones. I think that'll help a little bit without going crazy about actually the final steps of absorbing it. But so let's get off to the side. Digestion. Okay, four real things in that: mechanical and chemical breakdown. That's called digestion. Don't get it confused with absorption. Absorption is actually taking it into your bloodstream or the lymph, typically through cells that line what we call the alimentary canal. Why I make this so here's let me give you the four things. Ingestion, putting it in. Digestion, breaking it down either mechanically, think chewing, or chemically, think saliva getting on it, stuff that's in the saliva, acid in your stomach. Those are all chemical activities that help to break things down. That's what digestion is. Absorption, again, is the actual when it truly enters your body. You have to have an understanding of what this alimentary canal is. Basically, this is a tube that's roughly the better part of 30 feet long. It starts at your mouth and ends at your anus. And even though that's for most of us, that's maybe 3 feet. It's it's twisted and turned and folded and twisted and all of those things expanded, contracted, and reshaped. But effectively, it's a tube that goes through you. The analogy I always use is like a spool of thread. So you have a spool of thread, okay, that's got a hole in the middle of it. So if you're on your sewing machine, you put that down on the hole on the little metal thing. Okay, that is the alimentary canal. On the exterior is an outer boundary, like your skin or what. But if you think of the lining or which if you took out that metal thing and just looked at the lining, basically that's the alimentary canal. It has a moist lining we call a mucous membrane or a mucosal lining. It's just different than some of the other ones we've looked at, different than in the respiratory, different in other areas, different than in the bloodstream. They're basically linings that are there. This one is technically the passage into your body is when it gets through the cells and the lining. And obviously we're going to have stuff left over and we have to be able to excrete this, so we call that elimination. Ingestion, digestion, be it chemical or mechanical, absorption, elimination. And that's basically what happens. And here they give you the idea of what mechanical and chemical digestion is. Mechanical, you can figure that out, whether it's your teeth chomping it, whether your stomach, which is basically like a great big old mixing bag, mixing it back and forth. And in the process, we add chemicals at different areas to really help that and eventually get it down to a fine paste that eventually turns into the material we actually absorb. Understand, nothing big gets absorbed. All the proteins you and I ingest, a large amount of our diet is proteins and carbohydrates. All those proteins, we absorb the individual amino acids. The carbohydrates, we absorb monosaccharides like glucose, fructose, and galactose. When someone's lactose intolerant, they lack an enzyme called lactase that's in the gut that will break down the lactose into glucose and galactose, which you can absorb. The fact that the lactose is staying in there, it pulls water to it, it irritates the lining. Some people have a very, very distinctive reaction that's unpleasant, which is meant by lactose intolerance. Something that can hit just like that. Like I have two stepsons who weren't that way when they were kids, and they get if they get any dairy inadvertently or something nobody told them about, they're racing to the bathroom right away. And it didn't happen when they were younger. It just didn't surface until they were probably, 25, 30 years old. Interestingly. So, and as you can see, carry out mechanical and chemical digestion, ingestion. The propulsion is interesting. They're going to show you about this. Basically, what's neat about this, the layers, every hollow tube we've talked about. Bronchi have smooth muscle. The heart has cardiac muscle. Blood vessels have smooth muscle. These have smooth muscle, which means they're involuntary. We don't control it. And the smooth muscle is consistently around the hollow tube, and the hole in the hollow tube is called the lumen, Lumen. You have circular muscle and longitudinal muscle, circular and longitudinal. And so the method of action for everything is one of two things, based on those muscles and their activity. The major action is called peristalsis. That's alternating. You're at the bottom of the toothpaste tube. Squeeze, push. Squeeze, push. That's peristalsis. Taking it from the starting point, effectively it starts somewhere in your esophagus and pushing stuff out. That's the major activity. The circular muscles squeeze, the longitudinal muscles push, and it's like waves of activity. The other thing that happens, sometimes in the stomach and a lot in the small intestine, is called segmentation. It's moving that stuff over and back between segments, back and forth, before you push it along. It's like making sure it's thoroughly beat up and chemically attacked, chemically beaten up and physically beaten up until it's ready to get pushed to the next area. And then we do it some more. It's called segmentation. So those are the two main means of motion, and we don't have anything to do with it. Your GI tract will do it all by yourself. It has its own nervous system. You and I do not have we don't have supervisory capacity over this. It's all involuntary. Yes, we learned about an autonomic nervous system. The sympathetic nervous system will slow it down in fight or flight. The parasympathetic will be busy when we're like sitting here now or sleeping. But other than that, it works on its own. And I am living proof of that. The parasympathetic nerve that makes it work is called the vagus nerve. I've had not once but twice sections of my vagus nerve going to my stomach removed because of giant stomach surgeries that I had. One in 93, one in 2000. Obviously, I have been able to digest. It's not like I'm withering away on the vine. I saw you smile. Grace would have been making faces. Just saying. Yeah. Yeah, it doesn't look like you missed a meal, Lou. Say hello to the salad bar. Stop. 2 years ago, that might have been right. Now I'm lean and mean, or leaner and meaner. Okay, all of the above. How is it divided? The alimentary canal, the actual passageway for food, okay, that's the critical piece. And it's one hollow tube, depending on where they're located and depending on the shape, we give them a name. So all those, and we'll look at all those today. Hopefully we'll get through mouth and pharynx and at least start the esophagus. Maybe not, maybe so. And again, it's 8 meters is long. That's about 27 feet. So depending on the author, 27 to 30 feet. A lot longer than you think. I mean, considering the distance between your mouth and your rear end, even for the biggest of us, 3.5 feet, yet we've managed to take 30 feet of tubing and, for lack of a better term, shove it in there. It's a lot. And yes, salivary glands, the liver, the gallbladder, the pancreas are what we call accessory organs. This is a recurring pattern that you'll see. When we do renal, we have the same kind of thing. When we do male and female reproductive, the primary organ, ovaries and testes, everything else is an accessory organ. So whether it's a prostate gland, whether it's an oviduct, whether it's a uterus, whether it's an epididymis, doesn't matter, male or female, those are all accessory structures. So we have a main structure, in this case, the alimentary canal, everything else accessory. Do we have to have them? Yeah, the only one, we've got to have a liver, we've got to have a pancreas, Gallbladders are optional because you can remove those. And you're not going to, a lot of people have had them removed. And so it gives you an idea how you can take a look at any one of these diagrams. This is all small intestine, all neatly packaged in here, and this is large intestine that surrounds it. What makes this occur without going through all the thing and what's digested where and here, all of this is housed, everything, once you get through through the esophagus, this is roughly the area of the diaphragm. This is called the abdominal peritoneal cavity. You remember it from basic anatomy. First lecture, probably, first lab you had, learning about all this component. The lining is called peritoneum. So you have peritoneum on the wall, and you have peritoneum around all of these organs. It's basically simple squamous. It's moist. These are designed, and in relatively few areas is this tacked down. It's designed to move over one another freely, like this. And it constantly moves. One of the things, if you're going into nursing, you're going to listen to at bedside, you're going to take your stethoscope, put it on the abdomen, and hear little clinks and clunks and plinks and plunks. They are bowel sounds. We want those. When we don't have them, that's a problem. It's constantly moving. It's busier now than it is when you're active. It's busier still when you're sleeping. So these are constantly, and they're designed to move. I mean, there's other, which you're going to learn about where the common bile duct is, tacked down, pancreas a little bit tacked down, by these flexures of the large intestine tacked down under here to get to the sigmoid colon and the rectum. Other than that, everything moves. And it's amazing, the lining around here, which is called the visceral peritoneum, is doubly folded. And in it has blood vessels and nerves and lymphatics. It's got a fancy name. They're called the mesenteries. And they, over time, have adapted and sort of grown to more or less still giving all these things the ability to hold them in place like this. So it may surprise you that this is naturally how they occur. To which, here is the anecdote that everybody gets, you're stuck with it. So, I was a first year resident. I've been a doctor for, less than 6 months. And I'm sorry, you were cool. And I was doing an ER rotation. The assistant chief of surgery was the ER doc at the time. We got some guy, inner city hospital, Philadelphia, multiple staffers. Nothing unusual. He said, "Oh, Lou, we got to take him up to the OR." He says, "I'll get somebody to relieve me here and cover ER. We got to get him up there now." I said, "I need you to assist." He says, "It's not 10 o'clock at night." All right, I'm on the way up. So what does that mean to be assist? Well, it was just me, he and I, and basically he says, I got to make sure there are any vital structures, stuff's going to be leaking, I'm going to have to sew it up, all that good stuff. He said, I need you to hold and basically what a first assist does, hold the retractors. So I'm holding this whole thing open, and he's going in there, makes it, we call it a laparotomy, because they make a cut in your lap, so it gets its name. Typically from the xiphoid process to the umbilicus. I think that was the size of this one. And he's in there, and he opens it up, and he's carefully looking around, move the liver away. Oh, there's a little nick. We better fix that. Looking at a couple of little nicks in the bowel. He goes, surprisingly, not a lot of damage. The guy was wearing, as I recall, this is a terrible thing. It was check day. That means first of the month, and in the old days, before we had direct deposit, you got your checks in the mail, and you took them and cashed them. And this older man wearing a big top coat, it was winter, stabbed a number of times, I think 14 times. His check. Very sad. He did great. And so he'd gone through, he's found less damage than he thought, nothing major, all that type of stuff, very encouraging. Half an hour, 45 minutes, pretty quick. He goes, okay, we're getting ready to close. He said, I have to run the bowel. I'm like, okay. No. And so he begins to take out that stuff like this. He says, what I'm doing is I want to make sure we always run the bowel in both directions. We take it out and we look in our hands and with our eyes to see if there's a little nick or a cut. Lovely fellow, Dr. Garcia from Argentina. And as he's got this, all this is coming out on the sterile surgical field, on all the drapings, which are sterile, working on. And he said, and ran the other direction, sitting over here, and he goes, okay, that looks good. We're going to be ready to close. And you would think he would delicately put it all back in. And he would, just like you, he would have seen, my eyes must have opened up like saucers. And he must have seen my mouth gape right open. He goes, oh, no, Lou, it's fine. He goes, that's what you're supposed to do. The mesentery, it'll go right back where it's supposed to. Son of a gun, it's exactly what it did. Mother Nature has that. You don't have to lay that in there delicately. I mean, it's like companies coming over and the stuff's everywhere, and you shove it underneath the pillows, and you shove it in the closet. Don't let anybody open it. Lock it. The old days. Same thing. Honest to goodness. That gives you the idea of. So it's designed to move. And the bane of the existence, and why we're so careful and delicate, why my surgeries each took 8 hours. Trying to repair gastric stomach ulcers was because of you want to avoid what are called adhesions. When it adheres to one another, or adheres to the wall, or adheres to the skin, anything if it's stuck, it doesn't move well, and that's bad. It's going to jam up the works. You have to go back in there and fix it. Not good. That, everybody, is the story. I mean, this is right here. We're finally getting here. Tongue and esophagus. This is the diaphragm. Everything else is all the rest of this limited number. What is it? A yard? Everything else here is completely contained in the abdominal pelvic cavity. It can be, maybe this would be about an inch. Okay? An inch and a half in diameter. This probably about maybe 2.5 inches in diameter. Understand that there's so much surface area in roughly this typically about 23, 24 feet of small intestine. Think of, you had a hose that was about an inch in diameter, like a little thicker than a typical garden hose, ran about 25 feet. 25 feet, we wouldn't get to that door. And you slip the hose this way, long ways, and you just folded it open. Not a lot of surface area. Maybe you'd have 1.5 inches, 2 inches, flat, 25 feet, 50 square inches. The amount of actual surface area that you would have in that small bowel is about equal to the size of a tennis court, because it's got so many little nooks and crannies and tiny things that protrude called fingers. We call them villi. All of it's about surface area. It's elegantly designed to optimize that space for the maximum amount of surface area. The more surface area, the quicker and easier it is to absorb. While we can do without the colon, okay, we can't do without the small intestine, but thankfully, there's a lot of it. So if you had to remove sections of it, you can. But the colon is not essential, but having a sufficient amount, not the entirety, but a sufficient amount of small intestine is essential. And you will get to the most essential part, which is right up here, where the pancreas and the liver and the gallbladder deliver their secretions into this tiny thing called the duodenum, the smallest part of the small intestine, about 10 inches surrounding here, the head of the pancreas. We'll see it in different views. And that's the critical, it's called the common bile duct. It's got a fancy name now. That's the critical piece. They had to make sure mine was working, or they couldn't have done the second surgery, and I would have had to be tube fed for the rest of my life. That surgery would have been 25 years ago this coming June. But I'm here. So, interestingly, most of the things we've talked about have 3 layers. Everything is in 3s. Blood vessels, endothelium, simple squamous, smooth muscle, and then you have the external layer, another simple squamous layer. Heart, endothelium, squamous, cardiac muscle. You get the idea. This has got 4 layers. I'm going to show it to you. It's explained a little better than here. So they have, what makes it so important, the inner layer, the true mucosa, is not just cells. It has 3 layers within it to facilitate the importance of digestion and absorption. It's so elaborate, it has its own submucosa dedicated to all of its functions. Then you have smooth muscle, first circular, then longitudinal, and then you have an outer layer to eliminate friction, etc., part of what we call the visceral peritoneum. So that's why I use, and if it's not loaded, I will try to make sure it is loaded. This particular PowerPoint, that's what it looks like. So it could be anywhere. It's a very unique area. So this whole inner layer that you see here called the mucosa has the lining cells. The lining cells are all simple columnar with goblet cells. They start once the stomach begins. It's all about the stomach, small intestine, and large intestine. The esophagus is just a passageway. The mouth and the esophagus, as well as the anal rectal area, have stratified squamous non-keratinizing. They're subject to a lot of mechanical trauma because of food going in and feces coming out. Okay? But once it gets in the once it leaves the esophagus, pierces the diaphragm and enters your stomach, we're really going to start now the active part of really very, very active chemical digestion and mechanical digestion, much more so than any other area begins at that juncture. Because of that chemical onslaught, these cells, the entirety of every lining cell in the stomach, small and large intestine, is replaced every 3 to 6 days. Billions of cells every single day. Billions are replaced. So it's the most rapidly mitotic or replaceable area in the adult. That's the good news. Next time you get food poisoning, the next time you have a really bad stomach virus, that's the good news. That lining just sheds faster. Okay, you feel rotten for a couple of days, but then it gets better because we're growing a new one. Okay? And so on, and we just keep doing it again and again. So that inner layer has simple columnar with goblet cells. If it's in the stomach, you'll see we call these pits. These are glands that go all the way out to the support layer called the submucosa. Here, if we were in the small intestine, which has more of them, I suspect, they're called crypts, CRYPTS, that are there. They have special names that are associated with them. So you have simple columnar, and you have these various cells, and some of the glandular cells, and you can see it has effectively its own lucerareolar connective tissue network under it called the proper layer or lamina propria. The green things are tiny lymphatic bundles. Okay, you remember when we talked about immune system, we talked about MALT, M-A-L-T, mucosa associated lymphatic tissue. This is MALT. The name you'll hear referred to as GALT, G-A-L-T, for gut associated lymphatic tissue. Because this is the area where we really encounter, other than respiratory, most of our invaders. We swallow more than any other area. Okay, here and respiratory. Those are the big two. So what's bacteria, viruses, and a lot of times they'll be picked up by the lymphatics there, sent by way of the lymph system and addressed. They might be addressed there, taken care of. They might be moved further onto a lymph node potentially. And so you have the lining so busy and so reproductive, it has a very elaborate soft tissue network called the lamina propria, and it has its own little layer of smooth muscle. See, most of the time, the gut areas, the tubes are relatively flat. They don't expand unless there's stuff going through them. And what triggers them to do what they do, to make digestive chemicals, to begin to move, are receptors. There's 3 basic types. Stretch receptors that pull it apart. Chemical receptors, basically detecting, because when food comes in, it tends to be very concentrated. So they detect what's called osmolarity. And you might remember it's the food in general, and with the actions of what happens as it gets down there is very what we call hypertonic. So it's got a lot of particles kind of per volume. It's there. So you have stretch receptors, chemical receptors, and a different kind of chemical receptor, pH receptors. The stomach is an acid environment. The small intestine is an alkaline environment. pH plays a big role, tremendous role. Other than that, mouth, esophagus, pretty neutral. Large intestine and out, neutral. But since the vast amount of our digestion and absorption, digestion tremendously in the stomach, little absorption, digestion and nearly all the rest of the absorption in the small intestine, those are really busy areas, and it's all about pH as we will get as you get to know it. So there's a lot of that goes on there. So what happens with this, the last thing, because those stretch receptors, not only do they send signals to release certain chemicals, whether it's the large intestine or the small intestine or the stomach, okay, it also basically it increases what we call motility or movement. And this is called the muscularis mucosa. And you have to look at it from my perspective. When you eat something, in order to adequately process it, digest it, absorb it, you need maximum contact. The better the contact, the more efficient the mechanism. So when food comes in, oh, we're having pizza. I'm so happy tonight. And basically it comes in and it hugs the food. It embraces the food. It's just like, oh, hi. I have an existential relationship with food. I eat, therefore I am. Right? It's just like, oh, thank you. Oh, for having tacos, just what I wanted. It's not even Tuesday. See, we're like that in my house. You can have fun. We have fun cooking together. We try to make it like a cooking show. So I'm like I like to do Iron Chef. Love to do that stuff. So I have a very good time with that. Nevertheless, that's the muscularis mucosa. There's so much going on where a lot of these crypts and pits are anchored, a lot of blood vessels and nerves right there at the base. That is called the submucosa. Very elaborate, and it has its own nerve supply. What I was trying to tell you is it works on its own. Those stretch receptors, chemical receptors, pH receptors, they induce movement. Not just local movements here, but that peristalsis and segmentation. Here's the circular and the longitudinal. You'll see in some other areas, there's additional muscle. But consistently, we see circular closer to the middle and longitudinal farther away. That's the basis of peristalsis and segmentation. And more nerves. Again, those muscles work on their own. So they call them, as you can see, enteric. My enteric nerve supply, nerve plexus here. We have a submucosal nerve plexus. It's sometimes called the gut brain. It basically tells the gut what to do, and your autonomic nervous system is just supersedes it to a certain extent, and particularly in fight or flight. So I thought that it's a better illustration for my purposes why I went over in that direction. So here's the same thing that they describe it a little less detailed. The lining around the lumen. A lot of adaptations to surface here. We'll go into them in detail. Absorb, and in general, absorbs, secretes, etc. Submucosa, okay, plays a role in transportation, blood vessels, lymphatics, the external muscles, moving the tube, and the outer lining, which is, again, nearly always serous. This is everything other than a few points is designed to move. And they go into some, basically what's involved in here, and you can read that as well as I can read it. And now they're showing you just a little glimpse at some of these adaptations. This is small intestine. Here's that outer layer, the mesentery, the lining, with, as you can see, arteries and veins and lymphatic. It surrounds it. It's moist, but it keeps it organized. You can see the muscular layers, and they don't really demonstrate it well, but what you're going to see when we get to this, they have circular folds, and what that is, it's almost like pleated on the interior. And in each of those pleats in the interior, we're going to go over this again, it has tiny little nubs, but microscopically they look like little fingers, so we call them fingers, villi. Millions of them in the small intestine. And they're covered in cells all over, front, back, side to side. And each of those cells, all simple columnar, goblet cells, and all those cells have tiny microvilli. And I'll show you some illustrations. It's all about surface area. I was so deathly sick. They were going to effectively what they call feed me intravenously. The fancy name for today is called TPN, total parenteral, which means not through your stomach, nutrition. It's not easy. You got to know what you're doing with that. You can really mess people up. So you have to have professionals. And I remember when I was in the hospital, again, almost 25 years ago, the discussion between the gastroenterologist and the internist or the surgeon was, do we really want to do this? We could just put a line in for TPN, which they did post-operatively, by the way. Things had to heal inside. And the GI specialist said, look, we know there are areas of the alimentary canal that work. You're always better off seeing what you can absorb through the alimentary canal than using the TPN. We can always use the TPN, but let's try. So and what I would do is I'm getting down a couple of boosts 2-3 times a day. Boosts, whatever, any of those, when they taste good, you know you're sick. And I existed on those. At one point, for my first surgery, I went about 6 months and was unable to eat solid food. Only relatively clear liquids for months, or booze. I'm making up for missing those meals. I'm getting hungry just talking about it. See, we went to the movies. We had we're so cheap. We're so cheap. Girl Scout cookies in little plastic Ziploc bags in my pockets. She goes, you put them in. You're going to get in trouble, not me. I'm going to go see the movie. Those are good. Just let the Thin Mints just sort of dissolve on your tongue. Who doesn't like Thin Mints? What are the ones with the coconut on them? Are those the Samoas? So each of these finger-like projections called a villi has its own lymphatic. We're going to go over it again, what it does. And really, it's a very well understood thing. Here's the mixing. Okay, segmentation, back to back. You'll see it in the stomach. You'll see it in the small intestine. And then the peristalsis. Rings of contractions, a nice way to express it. Wave-like motion. And again, it's based on that first circular and then outer to that longitude. You'll see in the stomach, there's an extra layer of muscle that's at an angle that plays a role. And this is what they're taught here. They're showing you the stomach. And basically what's going on is it's taking this material and pushing it, segmentation, moving it, pushing it backward, pushing it forward, pushing it backward, starting here, pushing it backward, pushing it forward, backward and forward, etc. And eventually it moves it on. This is peristalsis, squeeze, push, squeeze, push, squeeze, push. And so they sort of take turns doing it, if you want to think of it this way. There's, again, the major nerve supply. The overrides are sympathetic and parasympathetic, though parasympathetic is usually active. Okay. And again, autonomic means we don't control them. Interestingly, one of the things, when those stretch receptors, they don't just activate muscles, but they activate the production of chemicals. When we get to the stomach, you're going to see the stomach produces a chemical called gastrin. And it's actually the gastrin works on the stomach. It's almost as though when food enters, it stretches the stomach, which is compressed, it might surprise you, to less than 2 ounces of volume, but it can expand to up to a gallon. What happens is it opens it up. It's like, oh. And that sends a signal to those glands, the gastric glands and the gastric pits, and basically says to them, okay, we've got food coming in, we need to get active. And it makes this a variety of chemicals, the most important which is called gastrin. So the enteroendocrine cells that they describe here in the stomach are called G cells. The big G stands for gastrin. Remember that when we describe stomach, we say gastric. And it basically increases the activity. It's almost like what we call an autocrine. Auto means self. It's a chemical produced by the stomach that acts on, produced by stomach cells and acts on stomach cells. Here's the easy part. The rest. Okay, the mouth. There's nothing special that goes on. I wrote it up here. The mouth is mostly mechanical. There's a little bit of chemical digestion. There's 3 sets of salivary glands. Okay, salivary glands are called parotid, sublingual, and submandibular. Most of what actually triggers digestion comes from parotid gland. It's serous. It's mostly liquid. And you're going to see the enzyme it makes. It's called salivary amylase. Amylase means starch digestion. The only place we digest starch until it gets to the small intestine is in our mouth. It's like, imagine, you could do it yourself, not pleasant to do. Put a piece of like bread in there, let it sit in your mouth for a second and take it out. Oh, it would be starting almost like to melt away. Amylase works pretty fast. There's a lot of what we take in is starches. The tongue has some lipase. It starts to digest fats. We're not touching protein until they get to the stomach. The parotid gland, mostly serous. The gland under your tongue is mostly mucus. It's more of a lubricant. And the submandibular, which is down here, sort of in that opening in the mandible, your lower jawbone. That area is a mixture of serous and mucus. But certainly the largest by far, parotid gland. And that's up here. Parotids are the ones that are sitting on top of them. Remember the name of this muscle is called the masseter, chewing muscle. Sitting on top of it is the parotid gland, one on either side. When someone gets the mumps, it would inflame those glands. You guys are all got MMR, so you're not getting the mumps. And I had to get the mump shot, but that was one of those things I didn't get. So yeah, it's basically mechanical. The saliva does produce a certain amount of activity with regard to the amylase, and yes, there's also lipase coming from the tongue. That's about all you can say about it. These are all parts of it. What does the tongue do? What do the cheeks do? Lips, etc. They're just helping to center the food more than anything else. They're assisting the process of breaking it down and certainly assisting the process of swallowing. I don't do any of this. I mean, maybe you'll do it in lab. Did you do it in lab? Yeah. Lingual frenulums and labial frenulums and good old uvula. All I can think of the uvula is like with cartoons. A big mouth at the end of the cartoon. You know what I'm talking about. You're one of me, I know. I was that dad and grandpa that when cartoons came on, I watched them. We don't want to watch cartoons. Sit down and watch them. I want to see this one. Dora the Explorer, all the smart cartoons. Blue's Clues. So that's all. Cheeks, muscles, lips, tongue. We know what it does. Taste buds, got it covered. Palate, hard, bony, soft. Really, just more muscular than anything else. Don't care. Tonsils and adenoids. Adenoids are really just, they're a pharyngeal tonsil. They're at the back. Typically, when you get your tonsils out, people who've had them out, they take both the palatine tonsils and the adenoids. So they say tonsils and adenoid extraction. But it's not, you don't get a lot out of this. This is because it's a shared system. The pharynx has got 3 parts, and the only ones really, we share the oropharynx with respiratory. The nasal is pretty much all respiratory. The laryngopharynx is just the part that really where food is passing out. It's shared, and once we swallow, then the epiglottis comes down, covers the opening into the larynx, and so into the trachea and respiratory, and voila, there's the esophagus sitting posterior to it. And the esophagus is really just a conduit. Nothing, it's a passageway. We'll look at the anatomy next time, but it's just a passageway that stretches. And because the C-shaped rings are C-shaped and open posteriorly, if food has an easier time passing. Imagine if it was a circular ring, you'd have to eat teeny tiny bits and swallow it, because sometimes it'd be tough getting it to pass through. And you'll be happy to know I don't do teeth at all. Not one. Don't care about how many primaries, how many deciduous, biting, grasping, tearing. It sounds like my dog with one of his toys. The over and under on most of the toys we get him is like 5 minutes. 75-pound dog tearing. And we play tug. He wins. Don't care. Hardly care. Nice mustache. Don't care. Couldn't care less. Don't care. Salivary glands. Then we care. That's me. Okay. Moistens, binds them, starts to dissolve it. That's the amylase. So those are the enzymes. Lingual lipase, salivary amylase. We start now with pH. Most of the foods, when we eat foods, we have a palate. In other words, we like things that are acidic. If you have coffee or colas, they're acidic. Milk, to some extent, is acidic. Dairy products aren't. We squeeze lemon and we put lime on so many different things. Citrus, orange juice, all those things. Those are acidic by definition. So we have a certain amount of bicarbonate ions, and because acid would affect the teeth adversely. So immediately we're starting pH controls. Here's the parotid, largest, you'll see the illustration, submandibular, sublingual, and yeah, there's other glands that are there. So serous is mostly watery, and there's the amylase, that's from the parotid. And as you remember, starches and glycogen, starches are a tremendous part of our diet, complex carbs. I mean, heck, if you had pasta last night or the night before, all complex carbs, all it does is it's starting to break it down into disaccharides. Again, we only absorb monosaccharides. That won't happen until we get down into the small intestine. And then, again, the tongue making the lipase. Mucus certainly lubricates it, binds it. That's fine. You can see the location. Parotid, quite large. Submandibular down here, that's the mandible. Sublingual, clearly under the tongue. Don't bother with the slides. And the pharynx is nothing more, think of it as a muscular funnel, except it's open in the front. It's open anteriorly. And we swallow by ways of three sets of muscles called pharyngeal constrictors. And what do? They constrict around the pharynx. They basically, as they swallow actively, and swallowing is very much an active or skeletal motion. When you get about half to 2/3 of the way down the esophagus, that's about when peristalsis starts. We'll look at it more when we look at the esophagus. These are basically the tubes, all the way to the stomach. And basically, and again, it's a relatively flat tube that opens up. These are the layers of constrictors. There's other muscles that are involved. And again, you can see you're in close proximity to the tongue. We have a variety of muscles, all that sort of in the area here, under your chin and the anterior portion of the neck. They play sort of what I call an auxiliary role. They help a little bit, but they're not a big deal. And all these books go into these stages. I really don't care. Yeah, it's voluntary to start, right? And then, sensory receptors. But once you get it in there and those bottom constrictors relax, peristalsis takes over. That's the last wave. So, again, half to 2/3 of the way down on average. You have to look at those. And I stopped it there with the other group. So we're going to stop it there with you. Very good. Thank you. Have a great weekend.